On July 1st, 2024, India basically hit a giant refresh button on its entire criminal justice system. We're talking about replacing laws that were over a century and a half old. This is a complete overhaul of the legal rulebook, so let's dive in and figure out what it all means. I want you to imagine something for a second. What if you tried to run today's apps on a computer from the 1860s? It sounds kind of ridiculous, right? Well, that's pretty much what India's legal system has been doing. The old laws, they weren't necessarily bad, but they were built for a totally different world, a different time. So this isn't just a small patch, it's a full-on system upgrade. Just look at this gap. The original laws were drafted way back in the 1860s during the British colonial era, and for almost 150 years, that core framework just stayed. Think about everything that's changed since then. We've invented the internet, we have DNA testing, we all carry smartphones, yet the legal rulebook was stuck in the past. Now, we're seeing new laws, the Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita, the Bharatiya Nagarik Suraksha Sanhita, and the Bharatiya Sakshya Adhiniyam finally replace that old system. So why was this rulebook written in the first place? To really get the new stuff, we've got to take a quick look at the old. And that story starts with the British and a key figure you might have heard of named Thomas Macaulay. You see, before the British created one single code, justice in India was, well, it was all over the place. Different regions and communities had their own laws, and a lot of them weren't even written down. This made things super inconsistent and time-consuming. For the British, who wanted to establish firm control, this just wasn't going to work. They needed one common, written-down set of rules for everybody. Okay, before we jump into all the big changes, we need to quickly break down two key legal terms. I promise it's really simple. Just think of it like this. There's a difference between the rules of a game and the game plan for what happens when someone breaks a rule. First up, we've got substantive law. This is basically the what. It's the main rule book that tells you what's illegal, from theft all the way to murder, and it lays out the penalties. Put simply, this law just tells you what the rules are. Here's a perfect example. A traffic sign that says speed limit 60. That is substantive law. It's a direct, clear command about what you can and cannot do. No ambiguity there. And then there's procedural law. This is the how. So once a rule gets broken, what happens next? How does someone file a complaint? How does an investigation actually work? What are the steps in a trial? All of that, that's procedural law. So let's go back to that speeding example. You ignored the speed limit 60 sign. Procedural law is the entire playbook that follows. The police pulling you over, the process of writing the ticket, and all the steps you take to either pay that fine or fight it in court. So one is the rule, the other is the game plan. Simple, right? All right, now that we've got the basics down, let's get to the good stuff. The new features in this massive 2024 legal upgrade. The whole point was to move away from that old colonial mindset and really modernize the entire process. So what are some of these big upgrades? Well, the new laws are designed to focus more on the victims of crime. They introduce strict timelines to speed everything up, they add new kinds of punishments like community service, they fully integrate technology, and they give a special focus to crimes against women and children. Let's talk about community service for a second. For pretty minor offenses, instead of sending someone to a jail that's already overcrowded, a judge can now assign them unpaid social work. The goal here is really twofold. It helps reduce the huge burden on our prisons, and it gives first-time offenders a chance to reform without the heavy stigma of a jail sentence. One of the biggest complaints about the old system was just delay. Things took forever. These new laws tackle that problem head-on with strict, mandatory timelines. For example, once all the arguments in a case are done, a judge has to deliver the final judgment within 45 days. No more endless waiting. The system is also making a big shift to be more victim-centric. In the past, victims could be left completely in the dark for months or even years. Now, the police have a duty to inform the victim about the progress of their investigation within 90 days. This isn't just a small update. It's a huge shift that gives power and information back to the people who were most affected by the crime. Now, not every single change has been met with universal applause. There's one update in particular about police custody that has sparked a whole lot of debate. It's a change that's aiming for efficiency, but it definitely raises some questions about individual rights. So here's how it works. Under the old system, police could get up to 15 days of custody for interrogation, but they had to take it all at the very beginning. Under the new law, they can now ask for that 15-day custody period in smaller chunks at any point during the first 40 to 60 days of the investigation. So you can see the two sides of the coin here. On one hand, authorities argue this gives them way more flexibility. They can gather evidence first and then take custody when they have very specific questions they need to ask. But on the other hand, critics are worried. They argue this could be misused to harass people and creates a ton of uncertainty for the accused, who won't know when to apply for bail, because that threat of police custody is just always hanging over them. Okay, this brings up a huge practical question. What happens to all the cases that were filed before July 1st, 2024? I mean, if a crime happened last year, but the trial is still going, do the old laws apply or the new ones? So how does this all break down? Remember our rule versus game plan analogy? Well, that's exactly how it works. For any crime committed before July 1st, the substantive law, the rule itself, is the old one. You get judged by the law that was in place at the time of the crime. But the procedural law, the game plan for the investigation and trial, will now follow the new rules for all cases, whether they're old or new. Okay, wow, that was a lot to take in. So let's do a super quick recap of the most important points from this whole explainer. First, India's criminal justice system has just gone through its biggest shakeup in 150 years. Second, the new laws are really built around key ideas like speedy justice, using technology, and putting victims first. Third, we're seeing new punishments like community service for smaller crimes. And finally, there's that controversial change to police custody rules, which is really a debate between effective investigation and the rights of the accused. So at the end of the day, India's entire legal operating system has been rebooted. We have new laws, new timelines, new technology, and a whole new philosophy. The big question now is, will all these changes actually lead to a justice system that is truly faster, smarter, and fairer for every single person? Hey, if this explainer helped you get your head around these massive changes, do me a favor and hit that like button, and maybe share it with your classmates. And of course, make sure you subscribe for more explainers where we break down complex stuff just like this. Thanks for watching.